I've been told, hi, Paul Clements from the Blended Capital Group, and I've been told that there's only really one message for the conference today, which is, I might get the pronunciation wrong, but the message is, Kapeshaba Poko. Is that okay? Good. And it's been the end of a long and amazing day. So huge thanks to the president of IBEF, to the team, to ArcelorMittal, for the kind arrangements, to everyone involved. So I'm going to run straight into it. You've had a lot of information. So I'm actually going to slow it down and tell a little bit of the story of ESG and a little bit of my story and why it means so much to Espirito Santo. I now call Vitoria the Atlantic Pearl. It is the Atlantic Pearl of Brazil, and it's remarkable. But why is ESG important to your companies, to the state, to Brazil, to the world? Well, let me begin with how ESG affects organizations, but I'm going to start in space. Is that okay? You've got to say yes. I can't hear you. You've got to say yes. A bit louder. One more. Okay, I'll start in space. So let me see if this works. In life, there are moments and things that you capture through your eyes, right? So the first things I'm going to show you are two pictures. And for me, those pictures start in 92. What happened in 92 in Rio? It was the Rio Earth Summit. Brazil defined sustainable development. The second image is 30 years later. But these two images show the challenge of sustainable development and then the opportunity. So this is 1992 in Bangkok. I was in Bangkok and I wanted to be in Rio. So I was in the wrong place, okay? I was desperate to be in Rio. I wanted to be at the UNCED Earth Summit. And what this image told me, I had my first business in Bangkok. It was called the Environmental Business Group in 1992. So when my mother heard that, she said, God save him, he'll never make money. Okay? Yeah. Please. Okay, thank you. So look, the Bangkok image says everything you need to know about the challenge of sustainable development. Bangkok was a city of 8 million people and 11 million cars. It was one of the most polluted places in the world. So with my small company, the Environmental Business Group, I woke up one morning and said, a problem of this scale, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of pollution, in terms of social inequality, there's one thing you need to do. You need to move money, not in the billions, in the trillions worldwide. For us to have sustainable development, you need to get capital, private, public markets flowing in the trillions to deal with climate change, to deal with infrastructure, to deal with sanitation. That was lesson one, okay? So what I'm saying is my fundamental first lesson with a small environmental business was we're not going to touch this problem unless we get capital markets, get the banks, get the insurers, get the corporations moving at a much bigger scale. 30 years on, what do I see? This picture is obviously Tubarão, Brazil, which I saw with ArcelorMittal and some of the government. And actually in this picture, I see the opposite side. Bangkok was the challenge. This is the opportunity. So what do I mean by that? My first visit to Vitoria was last August, thanks to the Polícia Federal. And this image, when I finally left Vitoria and flew out, I looked left out of the plane. And I counted 23 bulk carriers offshore waiting to get into the port. And that moment for me was, this is a dynamic economy. It's happening. It's at the center of trade for a whole pile of reasons, but the infrastructure needs to be re-engineered and rebooted, right? To bring the ships in, to send the trade out, the minerals, the corn, the commodities. How do you do that? You have to attract both Brazilian and international investment in the billions. So sustainable development, I think, my lessons over 30 years, and I will come to ESG, sustainable development depends upon infrastructure that works for industry, business, and the communities. If that infrastructure is not just up to speed, it needs to be infrastructure for the future. I feel the energy, the economic energy in Espirito Santo. You only have to spend times with ArcelorMittal, Imatami, Marca Ambiental, a whole range of companies. The economy is happening. So my question is, in terms of how will Espirito Santo be prepared for 2030, for 2035, for 2040? How will you deal with climate change? One of the key things you have, I think you have Governor Renato Casagrande, his vision for sustainability, for decarbonization, for sustainable development is really powerful. So let me see if I can go back. 30 years ago, you could visit many cities in the emerging world. This is Bangkok, Thailand. At the heart of the sustainable development piece, both for communities in cities and industry, it is about shifting huge scales of finance into infrastructure, into communities, and making the markets work in a different way. It's begun to happen. 30 years on, if you look at Espirito Santo, you look at the Port of Victoria, you think of some of the other developments. This is the dynamic heart of world business and world trade. And the infrastructure needs to be ready for the future. So again, how do we mobilize markets? So those are two images from my life. One, I was in Bangkok, and I wanted to be in Rio. 30 years on, I'm in Victoria, and I'd like to be on a beach in the Caribbean, okay? No, I wouldn't, that's a joke. So let me jump on to ESG. So these two images sandwich 30 years of my professional life, but go back to 92. It's that simple, how do we get the world's pension funds, insurance reserves, sovereign wealth funds, the deepest pools of capital, how do we get them to put money into sustainable development? So that's really been the last 30 years. Let me move on. This is 2006 at the New York Stock Exchange. Everyone knows that balcony, that image. And you can see in the middle, Kofi Annan. On that stage is that day, there's $4 trillion of pension funds. And those $4 trillion of pension funds, there's the Norwegian government fund, there's the Thai government fund, there is CalSTRS, the world's biggest investors. And that day, April 27th, 2006, those $4 trillion of investors were saying, you know what? We get it. We get it, that there's massive risks around climate change, ecosystems destruction, social inequality, all of those things. But they're also saying we see the opportunity of building renewable infrastructure, of building clean ports, of building and developing clean steel. It's as simple as that. So in 2006, that's $4 trillion. Today, backing that set of UN principles, the principles for responsible investment, there's $121 trillion, 5,400 institutions. Does it mean our problems are solved? Does it mean that we have the money to be sustainable? No, but that is a signal to the markets, to the capital markets, and a signal to business and to corporations. We understand the new risks, but we also understand the opportunity. So the key for any corporation looking ahead is how do you begin to define your model for a new world? And again, one of the points here is think of the jump from $4 trillion to $121 trillion. The world's biggest investors saying to the corporate world and to governments, the world has a series of problems. We need to fix it. Infrastructure is at the heart of it. Sanitation, business efficiency, logistics, supply chains. And that really was where ESG began. So to have a conversation with these investors, my team in the UN, we thought, okay, how do you have a serious conversation about the future with the biggest investors? Well, They don't understand sustainable development back then. They think money and the business of money is about to make money. So we decided basically to create ESG, so that's environment, social, governance. And we did it in the language of financial materiality, so it's about risk and reward, and we did it in the context of fiduciary duty of investors. So ESG was a very simple part of this. It was to engage with the world's biggest investors and say, we have a series of problems, we can deal with them, and we can create new markets, and we can make money for the pensioners and for the citizens of the world. That was the very beginning of it. So ESG was essentially a construct to have a proper conversation with the world's biggest investors. If you look at the far left of that picture, as I'm looking at it, you can see my face there. I've got hair, which is, it's unusual. And I look very white. And the reason I look white was my team had worked through the night to get to this point and get the right people in place. So it was a memorable day. Again, the simple point, a lot of people get very complex about ESG. This is a signal from the world's biggest investors to the market. Let me keep running with it. I'm not sure of how much time I've had. So I'd like you to think of two things. One is, if you look back over the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, we have seen and understood risk in one way. That has changed forever. The nature of risk for business and capital markets going forward is not what we've known for the last 100 years. So what we're seeing is the nature of risk is changing, it's becoming complex, it's converging, it's systemic risk. And business needs to adjust to that. Once business understands new risk, whether it's the fact that the biggest ships can't get through the Panama Canal, the security issues in the Suez Canal, that makes Victoria and Espirito Santo that much closer to China and Shenzhen and Shanghai. These huge, big systemic risks. Once a business understands that, it begins to see new opportunities. That's the key point. And in support of ESG, we think it's powerful at three levels. You use ESG to analyze systemic change, structural change within your industry, and your own operational change. So analysis of three levels. It gives you a much better understanding. It gives you a risk map. It allows you to understand what the future of risk is and therefore what opportunities are. If you look backwards and depend upon old models, on old data, you're not getting future risk right. And every business needs to understand, mitigate, transfer risk, and make investments that will keep it resilient for the future. And again, let me speed up here. So why have things changed? Why have things changed in financial markets and capital markets? There's a lot of discussion around sustainable development and ESG. Not everyone believes it, some do. It's coming to get you as a business for these reasons. If you look at these three things, policy, prudential oversight, and capital markets, in terms of policy cohesion, the UN climate negotiations are now coming down to the regional and national level. Voluntary carbon markets are shifting and will become sovereign carbon markets. This figure, if we want to stay in line with Paris, 1.5 degrees C, 2 degrees C, in the next 20 years, we have to move $25 trillion, 25 trillion. That will not happen through carbon offsets. It will happen through a new financial system and new financial instruments, 25 trillion. Who are you in here are bankers? Who's involved in finance? Wouldn't you like a basis point of that 25 trillion? It will only happen if you adjust and become a business of the future. So these are big edge of space things. I would also say, if you look at those acronyms, BCBS, Basel Commission on Banking Supervision, BIS, Bank for International Settlements, IOSCO, the International Organization of Security Commissioners, and then the Insurance Association. 10 years ago, they were not looking at ESG. They were not looking at sustainability. They weren't. Now, each one of those bodies, prudential oversight bodies that look around the global economy, all of them have ESG embedded in what they're doing. Again, a signal to the market. You have the pension funds, you have the regulators. It's a powerful signal to business in the market. Again, in Brazil, CVM, US, SEC, all of them are moving. That UN PRI figure, the responsible investors, 121 trillion. UNCTAD has an operation called the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. It's 112 stock exchanges who've said, we get it, we have to change. If you're in a business and you're a CFO and you're not aware of these factors, you're not doing your job. It is changing. We've talked a lot for 30 years, but now it's changing. The International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds controls $8 trillion. Front and center of their concern is where they can invest at massive scale into climate change. It comes down to one thing: climate-aligned infrastructure. What do a lot of emerging markets need? To reboot and re-engineer the infrastructure. So what I'm saying is the deep pools of capital, all right? And let me finish off here, because I've actually got a surprise for you. I'm going to ask a colleague to join me for 2 minutes, in about 2 minutes. He will take 2 minutes and explain something that we'll come to. So, in conversations with the governor, with Felipe Rigoni, with Secretary Alvaro, with the vice governor over the past year, we've come up with the idea of making Espirito Santo, the ESG capital of the world. I won't go into that now. Been working closely with Luis Claudio Alamand. The idea is to take the vibrancy of your story and take it to the world's investors. And bring the world's investors who want to invest sustainable capital into Espirito Santo. And look, this is part of the discussion in the past year. I would love in 2032, that's the 40th anniversary of the Rio Earth Summit, for Espirito Santo to be seen not just as an example in Brazil, but to be seen as the sustainable example in the world. That you have an economy which is diversified, which is oil and gas, which has massive ports coming into play, where railways will come into play. But you know what? By 2032, Espirito Santo can say, this is what we wanted in Rio in 1992. We might not be perfect, but we are delivering it. We are using our oil wealth to invest in green infrastructure. It's a huge opportunity. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen nowhere like Espirito Santo in terms of the political will, in terms of the companies, in terms of the focus. And it takes me back a little bit to Kashaiba Poko. I don't really know what it means, but it's wild and flamboyant and disruptive, and you can change the world, and I bet you can. You've got the political will, you've got some of the companies doing it. Grab hold of it, and let's take that story to the world. In terms of making ES the ESG capital of the world by 2032, my team are happy to dive in and tell the full story to anyone. And that's evolved simply off the back of the amazing work done here by your government and by your companies. But let's take that story to the world, to the sovereign wealth funds, to all the pension funds, and say, this state is creating what we dreamed of in Rio and is going to deliver it. It's as simple as that. Where are we now? I'm going to jump on. Don't forget the social inequality piece, okay? Everyone thinks environment, governance. The reason it's ESG is it should be GES. It should be governance, environmental, and social. And in my office in 2004, sitting back, went, you know what? Put governance at the front, which is incredibly important, but it turns everyone off. What's sexy? Environment's sexy. Put E at the front. Put governance at the end. The most difficult thing for business and investors is to get social right. And social is the thing that the Milton Friedman-esque neoliberal people tend to flick off. So we put S in the middle, the social side of sustainability, to protect it. That's why it's ESG. It's not GES, but it's a lens to look through. So social inequality, critical. And at that point, I hope if this works, I'm going to ask my colleague to come up for just 2 minutes. So I chair a body called Future Fit Foundation. The man coming on stage is Martin Rich, a former investment banker making up for his sins. But for the last 10 years, he created a UK charity and is looking at system change. Martin, you've got 2 minutes. I hope I've made sense. I will be back on to finish. But ES, Espirito Santo, the ESG capital of the world, why not? I would love to take a model beyond Brazil to Indonesia, to India, to South Africa, to Kenya, and it will have ES written at the heart of it. Why not?
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. How good is this? 2 gringos for the price of 1. Yes. This is my first time in Brazil, so can you just make me feel welcome? My name is Martin Rich, so I just want to hear a loud, "Hola, Martin." Now, come on, make me feel welcome. Thank you. I could go home happy now. So I'm going to take just 2 minutes, and on 3 simple diagrams. I want to bridge. Paul has talked about where have we come from, and this vision of the future, and that is what I want to bridge towards. I hate it when the screen doesn't bring the text up properly, but look on the left-hand side. That is the old model that we have been using for 50, 60, 70, 80 years. The shareholder value model, where business externalized as much of the pain as it possibly could to internalize the profits and gains for itself and for shareholders. Damage to planet, damage to society did not matter. This capitalistic model that we've created, and I am an ex-investment banker, so I know this model very well, said just keep pushing everything out. The Milton Friedman model said let's internalize everything. If we take a step back and think, where was the natural conclusion that we were going to end up with? It's where we are today. Climate change, social inequality, social injustice. That is the natural conclusion. Maximizing more and more profit into a smaller and smaller number of hands. That, I would suggest, is not a sustainable future. You don't need me to tell you that. Science tells you that. We see that every day in the newspapers. So we need to think, if we're going to have the sustainable future, what does that model look like? In the 1990s and the 2000s, we moved towards the middle. We got to this idea of shared value, where those circles began to overlap. And we said, but business does good. Yes, it does. Absolutely, my friends, it does do good. And we said, well, it's okay, because if we're doing some good, surely that offsets the harm that is done elsewhere. Well, okay, but let's think of it this way. If you double the salary of the chief executive and you halve the salaries of everybody else, is that equal? Is that okay? I mean, your chief executive might like that, right? If we cut down trees in one part of the world and we plant trees in another part of the world, it's about the same. Well, maybe, but maybe not. The biodiversity is different. The impacts will be massively different. Offsetting losses in one place with gains somewhere else is not the same. And this model didn't actually get us to a point where the gains were even the same. They were just less. So this model was definitely an improvement, but it's not very satisfying. It's not going to get us to a 1.5 degree world. It's not going to get us to an equal world. It's not going to get us to a sustainable future. So where we need to get to, at Future Fit Foundation, we talk about system value. Let's keep converging those circles together. Let's create a world where business, government, cities create a flourishing environment, a flourishing society within a flourishing planet. That, my friends, is the future. That is what a sustainable future looks like. And if you say we don't know how to do that, I don't have time to go into it right now. Paul's going to strike me with the microphone. Future Fit Foundation has created a roadmap to take you there. It's on the internet right now. You can download it for free. We are going to embed this framework in the heart of ES as the capital of ESG. So I look forward to meeting many of you on that journey in the future. Thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me join Paul.
And as the conference organizers get nervous, I will finish in 2 minutes. Then we're done, okay? So thanks for bearing with us. And look, lots of people talk about sustainability. The Future Fit Foundation, I chair its board of trustees. It's a charity. I've been looking for them for 35 years. Why? He's an investment banker who did structured derivatives, and then he came to God, okay? So it's an incredible 10 years he's spent of his money and his life. Let me finish with one example, and it's a challenge. because it's a lot of information and I'm going to do very quickly, but it's a challenge to anyone in finance or anyone in business, right? A lot of talk about carbon offsets and greenwashing and all of those things, voluntary carbon markets. Last year, the voluntary carbon markets sold $3 billion. That was it. That was the total. Nothing wrong with them, a little bit hectic. We need to clear 25 trillion to stay in line with Paris. That means we're going to move to sovereign markets. That's happening. And I think carbon offsets serve a purpose. A little bit unreliable sometimes, greenwash. What is happening, and this is the challenge for you, is that there is a whole, it's not theoretical, it's happening now, right? There's a whole range of new instruments. Who remembers credit default swaps? They've got a bad name. Who knows what ISDA is? The International Swaps and Derivatives Association. What happened in March? ISDA created its first climate subcommittee, right? What that is a signal is there's a whole range of new instruments coming, which are not about carbon offsets. It's about the convergence of data from space, data on the ground. We're much better at that. It's the understanding that credit default swaps can become carbon default swaps. It's swapping risk at a sovereign level from emitter nations to sink nations. And the third thing is the instruments being created. If you think of those institutions on the New York Stock Exchange, pension funds don't invest in carbon offsets or strange things. They invest in instruments they understand, bond-like, fixed-like instruments that stay for a long time. That range of instruments is now happening right now. It's not particularly known about, right? And it's from some of the most sophisticated financiers in the world, who I've been working 35 years to realize that the monetization of natural capital will happen. So my final slide is this. And again, that oblong it's the state of Espirito Santo. And you've got all the different plantations, natural forests, industry, ports, city, tourism, indigenous communities, rural, etc., regenerative land use. All of that has a data value can actually now be changed into a new breed of financial instruments. It's not magic. It's not higgledy-giggledy. It's the fact that the markets have woken up to the fact there's money to be made from natural assets. That is happening now. If you're in finance and you're not on top of what ISDA is doing in terms of the carbon and climate work, you're not doing your job, okay? So let me finish with this. Data is the new gold. Espirito Santo, in terms of the work that you're doing under Governor Casagrande and his team, and Espirito Santo in action, and Findus, and all the different players, is remarkable. The data piece has value. There's a new market being created, which most people haven't heard about. If you're not on top of Article 6, Article 6.2, Article 6.4, Article 6.8 from Paris, you're not really aware of that sovereign market. So I leave this as a challenge. I'd happily take anyone through ES, the ESG capital of the world, and show you what we're doing, how we're working with FutureFit, but more importantly, how we're working with the Brazilian brilliance and expertise that was seeded in Rio, and give you a better flavor for that. I'm going to stop there. Look, I hadn't been to Vittoria until last August. Now I've been 8 times. I call it the Atlantic Pearl. I think do you remember that famous picture? I think it was Vermeer, of the lady with the pearl earring. Does anyone know that piece of art, that picture? I think that's what Espirito Santo is and Vittoria is, all right? It really is a pearl, and I think it can be an incredible gift to the world in terms of what you're doing. I mean that from my heart. I've fallen in love with this place. Brasileira nunca desiste. Obrigado.